Eric Porter's commute home was supposed to be uneventful. Just another day. Just another drive. But in a single moment, flashing blue and red lights, everything changed. What should have been a routine stop became a battle of assumptions and authority. One that would ripple through the police department for months. And the man behind the wheel? He wasn't just another driver. He was the man who could decide the officer's future. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you question what a badge really stands for. The Sacramento sky was on fire with the colors of sunset, the kind of light that makes every shadow stretch and every rooftop glow. Eric Porter guided his silver sedan through the streets with a quiet sort of relief. His workday was done, and home was just a few turns away. The hum of the engine was steady, the air from the vents cool against his skin, a small comfort after hours of deadlines and meetings. His tie hung slightly loose, the top button undone, and on the radio, a faint jazz melody drifted lazily between the sounds of the road. Traffic wasn't heavy. Most drivers, like Eric, seemed eager to get home and leave the day behind. He approached an intersection, the traffic light shifting to yellow. Eric eased off the gas, letting the car roll into a smooth, unhurried stop. The cabin was peaceful until it wasn't. From behind him, the sharp, urgent flash of blue and red filled his mirrors. The siren's wail tore through the jazz and through his moment of calm. Eric's brows knit together. He knew he'd stopped at the light. Still, he signaled right, guiding his car toward the curb with the calm precision of someone who didn't see the point in arguing with lights and sirens in motion. The window slid down with a low hum as the police cruiser pulled in behind him. He could feel the air shift, not in temperature, but in tone. Something about the moment was already different. The car door behind him opened with a hollow thunk, followed by the solid rhythm of boots hitting asphalt. From the cruiser emerged Officer Bradley Larson. He was in his mid-30s, the kind of build that came from both gym time and the confidence of wearing a badge daily. His hair was shaved close to the scalp, his posture upright, each step carrying the unspoken weight of authority. The gleam of the badge on his chest caught the last of the sunlight, throwing a bright flash across Eric's peripheral vision. Larson stopped just short of the driver's side window, squared his shoulders, and without preamble said, "License and registration." His voice was even but clipped, like he'd said the same words 1,000 times and didn't feel the need to dress them up. Eric's movements were calm, deliberate. He opened the glove compartment, retrieved the registration, and reached for his wallet, handing over his driver's license without fuss. He didn't rush, didn't fumble, each motion precise. Larson accepted the documents, but rather than immediately checking them, his eyes remained fixed on Eric, scanning, measuring, as though searching for something unseen. His gaze was intense enough to make most people shrink back. Eric didn't. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larson asked, leaning just enough toward the open window to make his presence more imposing. "I'm not entirely sure, officer," Eric replied in a tone that was respectful but steady. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larson said after a brief pause. The pause mattered. It carried the faint hesitation of someone not entirely confident in his own claim. Eric frowned lightly, then nodded once. "I thought I slowed in time, but I understand." His voice carried no edge, no sarcasm, just acceptance of the statement, whether or not he believed it. Larson didn't move on. His eyes narrowed, his posture shifted. The encounter was no longer about a traffic violation. Silence stretched in the space between them, the sound of passing cars filling the gap. Then Larson tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharpening. "You're not from around here, are you?" The question carried more than curiosity. It had weight, a probing undertone. "I moved here a few months ago," Eric said, his tone neutral. "My address is on the license." Larson's eyes didn't soften. Instead, his next question came with a faint edge. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just going home," Eric answered. The words should have been enough. But Larson didn't take a step back. His presence pressed in closer, his authority filling the space like a heavy blanket. The questions were less about traffic law now and more about seeing what would surface if he pushed. "You mind stepping out of the car?" Larson said, the request flat, but carrying an unspoken "this isn't optional." Eric's hand tightened subtly on the steering wheel. The leather under his palm was warm from the day's heat. He allowed the briefest pause before moving, unlocking the door with a quiet click. He stepped out into the cooling air, standing a shade taller than Larson, his suit jacket settling neatly on his frame. Larson's gaze took in the tailored lines of the suit, the polished shoes, the watch at Eric's wrist. They didn't seem to fit the profile he had already built in his mind, and yet, instead of changing his approach, the disconnect only seemed to make him dig in further. Larson gestured toward the front of the car with 2 fingers, his expression unreadable but his tone all business. "Hands where I can see them." Eric complied without hesitation, his movements smooth and deliberate. His palms met the cool metal of the sedan's hood. The fading warmth of the day still clung to it, the paint reflecting the last traces of sunlight. Larson stepped in close, his boots crunching against the gravel scattered along the roadside. The pat-down began, quick, practice sweeps along Eric's arms, torso, and legs. But there was something extra in the way Larson moved. His hands lingered a little too long, pressed just a fraction harder than necessary, as if trying to provoke a reaction. Most people would stiffen or flinch. Eric didn't. His posture stayed relaxed, his breathing steady. He wasn't performing calm, he was calm. Larson stepped back a half step, his jaw tightening slightly. "You're clean," he muttered, as though irritated by the lack of contraband, as though he'd been hoping for something more. Eric straightened, turning to face him. "Of course I am," he said quietly. There was no smugness in his tone, but there was a confidence that carried just as much weight. Larson's eyes narrowed, his gaze studying the man in front of him. This wasn't how these interactions usually went. The driver wasn't nervous. He wasn't apologetic. And that put Larson on edge. The air between them seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Larson's voice dropped a notch, adopting the tone of someone circling prey. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works." Eric met his gaze, unflinching. "I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement," he said, his words carefully measured. "Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years." Larson tilted his head, almost smirking. "That so? You a lawyer or something?" Eric's mouth curved into the faintest of smiles. "Or something." The ambiguity irritated Larson more than a direct challenge would have. He stepped closer, close enough that Eric could see the slight twitch in the corner of his mouth. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "You think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Eric's tone didn't waver. "I don't think anything, officer. I believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of it here." The words landed like a pebble in still water, small, but the ripples were immediate. Larson's jaw worked, the muscle ticking at the side. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped, regrouping as if searching for a new angle. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Passing cars seemed louder now, their tires whispering over the asphalt. Larson finally broke the silence. "People like you always." He caught himself, but the pause was too late. The words hung between them, unfinished yet complete in implication. Eric's eyes sharpened, though the rest of his expression remained neutral. "People like me?" The question was quiet, but it was loaded. Larson shifted his stance, defensive now. "You know what I mean." "I think I do," Eric said softly. The air around them seemed to tighten, as if both knew they'd crossed into a space that wasn't about traffic laws anymore. Larson took a step back, but his hand drifted toward his belt, a reflex rather than a necessity. He was losing his footing in the exchange, and the realization seemed to make him double down internally. Eric's voice was calm when he spoke next. "I think it's time you know who I am." Larson scoffed. "I don't care who you are." But there was a thin crack in his voice now, barely perceptible. Eric moved deliberately, his right hand sliding into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said evenly. Larson's gaze followed the motion, his hand twitching near his holster. From the pocket emerged a leather wallet. Eric flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. The metal caught the dying light, reflecting it into Larson's eyes. "Eric Porter," he said, tone casual but carrying authority. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." For the first time, Larson's face shifted. Not in anger, but in something close to realization. "I oversee officer conduct," Eric continued, his voice steady but edged with disappointment. "My job is to make sure this badge stands for integrity, not intimidation." Larson's hand dropped from his belt, his confident posture starting to unravel. The authority in his voice from minutes earlier was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier. "You assumed I wouldn't know my rights," Eric went on. "That I wouldn't understand the law you swore to uphold. That I wouldn't deserve respect." He paused just long enough for the words to sting. "And that's not just a problem for me, officer. That's a problem for everyone you encounter in this uniform." Larson's gaze faltered. Eric had closed the gap between them, not physically but in the balance of control. "Here's what's going to happen," Eric said finally. "You're going to take a step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next. And you're going to hear from me again, not as a driver you stopped, but as the man deciding whether you're fit to wear that badge." The next morning, the light through Eric's office blinds cast sharp lines across his desk. In front of him lay a folder stamped with a name in black type. Officer Bradley Larson. The file told a quiet but clear story. Minor complaints, vague allegations of unprofessional conduct, excessive stops that never resulted in charges. None of them had been pursued with any real energy. Eric sat back, fingers steepled, thinking not just about Larson, but about what he represented. The problem wasn't just one man. It was a culture that allowed behavior like this to pass unnoticed. That afternoon, Eric met with Chief Daniels in a small conference room. Daniels, a veteran with salt and pepper hair, leaned back in his chair, listening as Eric recounted the traffic stop. "This isn't isolated," Eric said. "Larson's behavior is a symptom, and quiet handling isn't fixing it." "You'll ruffle feathers," Daniels warned. Eric's eyes were steady. "Good. It's about time." In the weeks that followed, the Larson stop became the catalyst for a sweeping review. Training programs were reevaluated. New protocols for accountability were drafted. Public forums were held, giving community members space to speak about their own experiences. Eric didn't aim to destroy careers. He aimed to prevent the next unjust stop, the next unnecessary escalation. Larson faced an internal hearing. Eric didn't hide his involvement. He sat in the room as testimony was read, watching Larson shift in his seat. The outcome? Suspension. Not the end of a career, but a stark warning. For Eric, the real victory wasn't in Larson's punishment. It was in the momentum for change. The department had been forced to look at itself in the mirror. And that reflection wasn't going away. As Eric left the hearing room that afternoon, the hallway seemed unusually quiet. The hum of office chatter, the ringing phones, it was all muted against the weight of what had just happened. He knew the work was far from over. Larson's case was just one thread in a much larger weave, and pulling on it had already begun to unravel other knots. But that was the point. Change didn't come from grand gestures alone. It came from moments like that traffic stop, where someone decided that silence wasn't an option. Eric didn't see himself as a hero. He was simply a man with the authority to hold others accountable, and the will to use it. And maybe, just maybe, the next officer who thought about leaning on intimidation would remember the driver who didn't flinch. And think twice. Because respect isn't optional. Not in the uniform. Not in the law. Not anywhere.